The first sound was the rip loud, sharp, tearing through the air like a crack of lightning in a silent sky. Dozens of travelers waiting at the gate froze. The rustle of snack bags, the chatter of families, the beeping of boarding scanners, all of it seemed to fall away into stunned quiet. Everyone turned toward the source of the noise. At the center of it stood a gate agent, her manicured fingers clutching what remained of a passport she had just torn in half. The pages fluttered in her hand like the wings of a dying bird before. She tossed them onto the counter with a smirk. The man whose passport had been destroyed stood tall. His broad shoulders relaxed, but his expression frozen in disbelief. He was a black man in his late 40s, dressed in simple travel clothes, a navy polo shirt, khaki pants, and a well-worn leather jacket. His luggage rested quietly at his side, a carry-on and a slim briefcase. Nothing unusual, nothing out of the ordinary. Yet to the gate agent, it had been enough to make him her target. "You people always cause trouble," she said loudly, her voice dripping with disdain. Her words carried across the gate area, sharp enough for every passenger nearby to hear. "Maybe now you'll think twice before wasting my time." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A young couple by the window exchanged horrified looks. Mother clutched her child's hand, shaking her head as though she couldn't believe what she had just witnessed. A man in a business suit pulled out his phone, already recording. The atmosphere had shifted from the usual impatience of air, traveled to the charged silence of outrage. The man did not react the way many expected. He didn't shout, he didn't slam his fist against the counter or demand to see a supervisor. Instead, he stood perfectly still, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. His eyes locked on the gate agent with a steady calm that unnerved her more than if he had exploded. His stillness seemed intentional, calculated, as if he were silently gathering every detail of the moment. The gate agent, perhaps mistaking his composure for weakness, doubled down. She shoved the torn pieces of the passport into the trash can beside her desk and folded her arms smugly. "Without valid travel documents, you're not going anywhere." "Security," she barked, her voice sharp enough to pierce the room. "Escort this man out. He's done here." Two airport security guards who had been lingering nearby stepped forward. Their uniforms were neat, their expressions uncertain. They hadn't seen exactly what had happened, only heard the command from the employee who technically outranked them in this setting. They approached hesitantly, exchanging glances that revealed their discomfort. It was clear they weren't eager to touch this situation. The man, however, didn't resist, didn't argue, didn't even move. He simply turned his head slightly to glance at the guards, his gaze steady and unreadable. Then he looked back at the agent. Still, he said nothing. The silence grew heavier with every second. Passengers began to murmur. Someone whispered, "Did she really just do that?" Another muttered, "That's illegal. She can't just rip up someone's passport." A teenage boy whispered to his mother, "Why is he so calm?" If that happened, to me, I'd be screaming. The gate agent lifted her chin, clearly relishing the power of the moment. "Well, what are you waiting for?" she snapped at the guards. "Remove him." But the guards hesitated, their eyes flickering between the composed passenger and the fiery agent. Something about the man's demeanor unsettled them. It wasn't fear, it wasn't confusion, it was control. He stood like someone who had seen this sort of ugliness before and had long ago learned how to handle it. Inside, though, his thoughts churned. Inspector Jonathan Miles, though nobody here knew that name, had seen hundreds of airport operations in his career with the Federal Aviation Administration. He had traveled undercover countless times, observing everything from flight safety checks to staff professionalism. Today was supposed to be routine, an unannounced assessment of the airline's staff interactions with travelers. He had not expected it to become personal. He had been warned during training years ago that some inspections would test his patience, that he might encounter behavior ranging from incompetence to outright hostility. But never in his career had he imagined a gate agent, in full view of dozens of witnesses, would destroy a passenger's passport while sneering racial insults. It was brazen, reckless, and illegal, and yet he remained calm, because Jonathan understood something the gate agent did not. Silence can be the sharpest weapon. Around him, the passengers began to rally. A middle-aged woman stood up from her seat near the boarding line. "You can't do that," she shouted toward the counter. "That's his passport. You have no right to tear it up." Another passenger, the businessman with the phone, called out, "This is all on camera. Everything. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, lady." The agent's confidence flickered for the first time, but only briefly. She plastered on a fake smile, the kind meant to assert authority in the face of opposition. "Sir was being uncooperative," she said, her tone rehearsed. "He presented suspicious documents, and I exercised my authority to prevent a potential security threat. That's my job. To keep all of you safe." The passengers booed. "That's a lie," someone shouted. "We saw the whole thing." Jonathan still didn't speak. Let the tension build. Let the witnesses' voices grow louder. Every word they spoke was a nail in the coffin of her defense. Every second of footage being captured on cell phones was evidence. He stood there like a storm cloud gathering weight, preparing to unleash when the time was right. The guards shifted uncomfortably. One of them leaned toward the other and muttered, "This doesn't feel right." The other nodded. "Yeah, I think we should wait before putting hands on him." The agent caught their hesitation. "What's the problem?" she snapped. "Said remove him." But the guards didn't move. Jonathan finally tilted his head, the faintest hint of a smile ghosting his lips. Not a smile of amusement, no. This was something colder, more precise. It was the smile of a man who knew he was in control of a game his opponent didn't even realize they were playing. The passengers could feel it too. The energy in the gate area had shifted again. The initial shock had turned to outrage, but now, slowly, it was becoming something else: anticipation. They didn't know who this man was, but they sensed it. He wasn't just another passenger, the gate agent. Growing frustrated with his silence, slammed her palm against the counter. "Say something," she barked. "Do you have anything to say for yourself? Because as far as I'm concerned, you're not boarding this plane. Not today. Not ever." The silence that followed was deafening. Jonathan's eyes flickered briefly to the trash can, where the remains of his passport sat like shredded evidence of her cruelty. Then he looked back up, his expression unreadable. He opened his mouth slightly as if to speak, then closed it. Again, letting the weight of her words linger in the air. Every second stretched longer. The passengers hanging on the edge of the moment. A child whispered, "Why doesn't he say anything?" His silence wasn't weakness. It was power. And deep inside, Jonathan knew, the gate agent had just written her own fate. She had no idea that the man standing before her, quiet and unyielding, was the very person who would soon decide the future of her career and perhaps the reputation of her entire airline. The storm hadn't broken yet, but it was coming. The silence at the gate was growing heavier, like a storm cloud gathering above everyone's heads. The passengers had shifted from being shocked spectators to uneasy witnesses who sensed that something bigger was unfolding. Some clutched their tickets tightly, others whispered nervously to one another, and a few brave souls recorded with their phones in plain sight. Everyone knew this wasn't a normal travel delay. Something about the man's silence, his stillness, and the agent's flustered arrogance told them the story wasn't over. Jonathan Miles stood motionless, but his mind was anything but still. Behind his calm eyes, years of training played out like a manual being opened page by page. He had been undercover dozens of times in situations where his authority as an FAA inspector could not be revealed until the moment was right. He had seen mechanics falsify inspection logs, pilots ignore safety procedures, and airlines cut corners to save time or money. But never had he witnessed something so blatant, so careless, and so openly hostile. This wasn't a hidden mistake or a quiet violation. This was arrogance weaponized in public, and he knew exactly how to deal with arrogance. The gate agent, still believing she was in control, tapped furiously at her keyboard. Her fingers moved without purpose, a show for the watching crowd. "Looks like your name's being flagged in." "The system now," she announced loudly. "Must be something you're hiding. Maybe fraud, maybe worse. Either way, you're not flying today." Jonathan tilted his head slightly, as though amused. Inside he felt a tightening in his chest. The kind of controlled fury that demanded discipline. His silence wasn't just for show, it was strategy. The longer she talked, the more rope she gave herself to hang with later. The security guards caught in the middle, shifted their weight from one foot to another. One cleared his throat and tried to sound official. "Sir, maybe you should step aside while we sort this out?" Jonathan's eyes flicked toward the guard, steady and calm, but the look he gave was enough to silence him mid-sentence. There was something in those eyes' authority. Wait, something that didn't belong to an ordinary traveler. The guard felt it instinctively and glanced at his partner, who gave a small shake of the head. Neither of them wanted to be the one to lay hands on this man. The passengers, meanwhile, had started to rally. A tall woman in a green jacket raised her voice. "We all saw what happened. He handed over his passport like anyone else, and she ripped it up. You can't treat people like this." "Yeah," another man chimed in. "That's his government property. That's illegal." The agent's fake smile cracked. "You people don't know what you're talking about. I have the authority to deny boarding to anyone who looks suspicious, and this man was acting suspicious." Her words rang hollow now. The crowd wasn't buying it. Even those who had initially stayed quiet were beginning to murmur their disapproval. A group of college students in the back shouted, "We're recording everything." Jonathan remained silent, letting the scene build naturally. He knew that witnesses were worth more than words. Every passenger who stood up for him, every phone raised to capture video, was more powerful than anything he could say in this moment. Then, just as the tension threatened to break, a new voice cut through the chaos. "What is going on here?" Heads turned. A woman in a crisp navy blue uniform approached briskly, her ID badge swinging from her neck. She was the gate supervisor, drawn by the commotion. Her eyes darted between the agent, the guards, and Jonathan, then to the crowd, which was buzzing. With outrage, the agent straightened immediately, her smugness evaporating into forced professionalism. "Oh, thank goodness you're here," she said, plastering on a smile. "This passenger presented suspicious documents. I'd act quickly to protect the safety of the flight." The supervisor frowned. "Suspicious documents?" "Yes," the agent said confidently, nodding toward the trash can. "I destroyed them. He won't be boarding." The supervisor's face froze. "You what?" The agent faltered. I tore them up. It's for safety reasons." The supervisor's tone dropped into icy disbelief. "You tore up a passenger's passport?" Gasps rose again from the crowd. Jonathan's expression didn't change, but his heart ticked a beat faster. This was the moment the tide would begin to turn. The agent tried to recover. "It wasn't valid, I could tell. I was protecting the airline, protecting all of you." She gestured vaguely toward the passengers, as if they would suddenly applaud her. Instead, they booed. The supervisor's eyes narrowed. She bent down and retrieved the torn pieces from the trash, holding them up. "Do you have any idea what you've done? This isn't some piece of paper you can throw away. This is government property. You could lose your job for this." The agent sputtered, her confidence unraveling. "I was just following my instincts." Jonathan finally spoke, his voice calm but carrying enough authority that it silenced the room. "Your instincts just destroyed an international travel document issued by the United States government." The agent froze, startled by the sound of his voice after so long a silence. The passengers leaned in, hungry for what he would say next. Jonathan's eyes locked on the supervisor, not the agent. "I'll need the pieces back." "They're evidence now." The supervisor blinked. "Evidence?" Gave a small nod. "Yes, evidence in an investigation." The words hung in the air. Some of the passengers looked at each other, confused. Investigation? What did he mean? The gate agent laughed nervously, trying to brush it off. "He's bluffing. He's nobody. Just some troublemaker trying to make me look bad." But her voice wavered. She didn't sound so sure anymore. Jonathan's eyes shifted back to her, and for the first time. His composure cracked just enough for her to glimpse the steel beneath. "You just interfered with federal documentation, unlawfully destroyed it, and publicly humiliated a passenger under false pretenses. Do you have any idea what that means?" The crowd erupted. "Yes, tell her that's right." The agent paled. You can't talk to me like that. You're not in charge here. Jonathan's lips curved into the faintest smirk. Aren't I? The supervisor's brow furrowed deeper. Something about the way he spoke, the measured authority, the absolute certain tenon of it matched the profile of a random traveler. She studied him carefully, her instincts telling her this man was not who he appeared to be. Before she could ask, Jonathan reached into his briefcase. Slowly, deliberately, he withdrew a second wallet, not the one he had used earlier, to hand. Over his passport, but another slimmer one. He opened it, revealing a badge. The gold glint caught in the airport lights, and the seal of the Federal Aviation Administration stared back at them all. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Phones zoomed in, capturing every detail. The security guards stiffened, their postures snapping to attention. The supervisor's eyes widened. And the agent. She went pale, her smug expression collapsing into panic. Jonathan's voice carried clear, calm, and commanding. Inspector Jonathan Miles. Federal Aviation Administration. I've been conducting an unannounced inspection of your airline's operations today. And congratulations, this gate just failed. The gate area erupted. Passengers cheered. Some laughed in disbelief. Others shouted angrily at the agent. The businessman with the phone muttered, I knew it. I knew he wasn't just some guy. Agent's jaw dropped. You're what? No, this isn't fair. You tricked me, you set me up. Jonathan's gaze was cold. No, you set yourself up. I gave you every opportunity to do your job professionally. You chose to abuse your power, to humiliate me, and to commit a federal offense in front of dozens of witnesses and multiple recording devices. That was your decision, not mine. The supervisor looked mortified. Inspector Miles, no idea. Please, let me. Jonathan held up a hand, silencing her. You'll have your chance to explain. For now, I want her removed from this post immediately, and I want a full report of this incident filed before the end of the day. Security guards didn't hesitate this time. They stepped forward not toward Jonathan, but toward the agent. She recoiled, stammering, Wait, no, this isn't right. He's lying. He has to be lying. But the badge was unmistakable, the authority in his voice undeniable. And the witnesses all around her had already spoken with their phones and their voices. Jonathan tucked the badge away, his composure once again steady, his silence returning like a drawn curtain. The storm he had been holding back had broken, and now the pieces would fall exactly where they were meant to. The gate area buzzed with energy. The passengers felt vindicated, as though they had been part of something bigger than a delayed boarding. They had seen arrogance meet accountability, cruelty meet justice. And though the flight would eventually board, nobody would forget the moment the silent passenger revealed who he really was. For Jonathan, though, the work wasn't done. The exposure was only the beginning. He knew this was more than just one. Corrupt agentit was a symptom of a larger disease within the airline's culture. And he was here to root it out, no matter how deep it went. The game had only just begun. The silence in the terminal felt heavy as Darren pulled out his badge and identified himself. For a moment, time itself seemed to freeze. The one smug grin on the gate agent's face collapsed, replaced by horror as she realized the magnitude of what she had done. The other passengers, who had been whispering amongst themselves, were now wide-eyed and completely still, watching history unfold before them. A man who had been humiliated only minutes earlier now stood tall, not just as a victim of bias, but as the very authority who had the power to change everything. Darren's voice carried the weight of authority and restraint, calm yet cutting. You ripped up the passport of a Federal Aviation Inspector? Do you realize what that means? Every action you take in this job is subject to scrutiny, and today your actions will be reviewed at the highest level. The agent's lips trembled. I didn't know, she stammered, her eyes darting desperately toward her supervisor who had just arrived on the scene. But the supervisor looked equally shaken, because he too knew the implications. This wasn't just about a mistreated traveler anymore. This was a potential federal case that could bring audits, penalties, and possibly the end of careers. Passengers, who had once been quiet, spectators began applauding, some cheering in support of Darren. The applause wasn't just for his title, it was for the way he had handled himself with dignity despite the disrespect. A woman shouted from the back, "That's what you get for judging someone by their skin." Others echoed with murmurs of agreement. Darren turned to the crowd briefly, raising a hand for silence. "I appreciate your support, but this moment isn't about applause. It's about accountability. If this can happen to me, it can happen to anyone else. And that cannot stand." His words struck deep, not only into the passengers, but into the hearts of the airport staff who had gathered. Suddenly realizing that the eyes of the public and the federal government were on them, the airport security team quickly arrived, led by a senior officer who had received the call about the incident. When Darren showed his credentials, the officer's entire demeanor shifted from suspicion to respect. "Sir, we'll handle this. Please allow us to escort you to the executive lounge until this is resolved." But Darren shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "This needs to be handled transparently. I won't hide away while the people who watch this happen are left wondering what the outcome will be. Justice, if it's hidden, feels like no justice at all." The gate agent's knees buckled as Darren documented everything with his phone, recording not only her torn passport lying in pieces on the counter, but also her visible panic. "For the record," Darren announced, his phone camera capturing her reaction, "this is the treatment a paying customer received today. This is the face of discrimination and abuse of power at this airline's gate." The woman burst into tears, collapsing into a chair. Please don't ruin me. I thought." Her voice trailed off, unable to finish the sentence because she knew any justification would sound hollow. Darren, despite the anger boiling inside him, chose to respond with composure. "You thought wrong? You thought my skin color, my clothing, or my quiet demeanor gave you permission to treat me as less than human. And now you're realizing you judged the wrong man. But the truth is, there is no right man to treat this way. Every person deserves respect, whether they're an inspector, a teacher, or just someone traveling to see family." The supervisor attempted to interject, stepping forward with his hands raised. "Inspector, please, let's not escalate this further. We'll compensate you, replace the passport, and ensure disciplinary action is taken. This doesn't need to become bigger than it already is." Darren narrowed his eyes. "Bigger? Do you think this is only about me? No, this is about the countless people who go unheard when their rights are trampled. Today, you're not just facing facing the truth of a system that allows bias to dictate how customers are treated. And I will ensure it's corrected." The words cut through the air like a blade, and the supervisor had no response. His silence said more than excuses ever could. News of the incident spread quickly. Passengers had already uploaded clips to social media, where hashtags began trending within minutes. #PassportJustice and #accountability in airlines. Within an hour, local reporters swarmed the terminal, trying to capture the story of the inspector, who had been disrespected at the gate. Darren, ever conscious of his position, chose his words carefully when approached by the press. "This isn't about me as an individual," he told the cameras, his tone steady and professional. "This is about ensuring that no traveler is ever humiliated for the color of their skin or for assumptions based on appearance. I will use my authority not for revenge, but for reform. The airline industry serves the public, and the public deserves dignity." The crowd erupted into applause again, this time louder, more unified, almost thunderous. The gate agent sobbed. Quietly in the corner, her once powerful position reduced to nothing under the weight of her own choices. Later that day, Darren met with top airline executives in a closed meeting. They were pale-faced and nervous, knowing that the scandal was already spreading beyond their control. "We're prepared to offer you whatever compensation you deem fit," one of them said, sliding a folder across the table. But Darren didn't even open it. "I don't want your money," he said coldly. "I want systemic change. Mandatory training for your staff on bias, clear disciplinary policies, and accountability when things like this happen. If you don't commit to that, I'll take this story all the way to Congress and every aviation board that oversees you." The executives exchanged tense glances. They realized he wasn't bluffing. His position gave him the power to follow through, and the last thing they wanted was a federal investigation that could cost them contracts, credibility, and millions in revenue. By the end of the meeting, the airline had not only agreed to Darren's demands, but it also promised to reinstate and expedite the replacement of his passport at their own expense with a formal public apology. A week later, Darren stood at a podium flanked by airline officials, addressing the public in a press conference broadcast nationwide. Behind him, the gate agent no longer employed was absent, but her actions had sparked a conversation much bigger than one person. Today isn't about punishment, Darren told the crowd. It's about progress. We must never forget that. Discrimination is not a mistake. It's a choice. When people choose prejudice over fairness, we must respond with accountability and reform. This incident could have been swept under the rug, but instead, it will become the reason thousands of employees are trained to see people as equals, not stereotypes. That's the kind of change that matters. The applause that followed wasn't just for Darren, it was for the message, the justice, and the hope that things could indeed improve. Parents pointed him out to their children in the audience, whispering that this was a man who stood his ground with courage and integrity that night. When Darren finally sat on his flight, his new passport safe in his jacket pocket, he gazed out of the window as the plane rose into the clouds. The irony wasn't lost on him. The very system meant to keep the skies safe had tried to break him, but instead it was forced to rebuild itself better. And as the lights of the city faded, below, Darren smiled faintly to himself. Justice had taken flight, and this time it was unstoppable. The end.